What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the still champs 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined by Matt Moreno. Matt, we've got lots of different topics on the mind of Dodger fans now that our season has ended. Free agency is around the corner, but arguably the biggest one on the minds of Dodger fans is Dave Roberts, his future with the club, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Why don't you set the stage sort of logistically where the Dodgers are at with Dave Roberts, and then we'll get into a conversation of what the future of Dave Roberts may or may not be with the organization.
Yeah, so after the 2018 season, which was obviously the Dodgers' second consecutive trip to the World Series, he signed a 4-year contract extension. That now is set to expire in 2022, so currently he would be, a quote-unquote lame duck manager, as it looks at present time. Dave Roberts did, a recent interview with Jorge Castillo of the LA Times, kind of expressing both a hope and expectation that he and the Dodgers will discuss another extension this offseason. It's that I think is my expectation as well. I don't see the team, even if it's, maybe not 4 years like before, I don't see the front office letting him go into the 2022 season with that being the final year on his contract. I know you have a quote from Andrew Friedman that we'll get to, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at. And I know we've gotten a lot of tweets since, and a lot of it, does stem from the Dodgers falling short in the NLCS, but fans kind of calling for a change with Dave Roberts, which we'll get into. Like, I don't necessarily see
so
or agree
the
with.
Roberts quote you mentioned in the LA Times interview is, quote, "I know I have another year left, and it's just kind of hoping they come to me and we can work something out, I guess. And if not, you just kind of do your job and play out the contract." That was Roberts' quote. Here was Andrew Friedman. He was kind of non-committal in his press conference, but then in an AM 570 interview, he had this to say, quote, "It's obvious he has been a big part of what we have accomplished looking back," referring to Dave Roberts. And then he goes on to say, "And we expect him to be a big part of what we accomplish looking forward." Now, for a lot of Dodger fans, I know that second piece is not what they were hoping to hear. We expect him to be a big part of what we accomplish looking forward. Let me throw some numbers at you from a Dave Roberts perspective. I remember I did an interview with John Weissman earlier this year, and we were talking about Dodger Hall of Famers. And he said, the next Dodger Hall of Famer outside of Clayton Kershaw, basically, might surprise some people. Now, this was pre-Albert Pujols, Max Scherzer, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, the next Hall of Famer for the Dodgers outside of Kershaw might be Dave Roberts. And I was like, Dave Roberts, a Hall of Famer? He's like, just look at the trajectory that he is on. Okay, now it's projecting what the next 5 to 10 years might look like. But here's where Dave Roberts is at. Right now, he has the 5th best winning percentage in Major League Baseball history as a manager. He is winning 62.2% of his games, which if you average that out to a 162-game season, Dave Roberts is averaging 101 wins over the course of his career. He, in 6 years as Dodgers manager, he has won 5 division titles. He has been to the World Series 3 times, and he has won the World Series once. So he's made the World Series in 50% of the seasons that he has managed in. And Matt, for me, the piece that I have to reconcile with when I hear people that are frustrated by Dave Roberts and want to get rid of him, I think the San Diego Padres should be a warning to all Dodger fans who want to get rid of their manager. The Padres, all of us before the season, look how talented this group is, look how ready they are for the next stage, and guess what? They completely imploded. It wasn't because the talent wasn't there. It wasn't because Fernando Tatis or Manny Machado stopped being good baseball players. It's because they had a manager that by all accounts was completely overmatched, had no control of the clubhouse, had no sense of chemistry amongst the team, had no idea what he was doing, and as a result, that team not only didn't win the World Series, they didn't even make the playoffs, which is a massive disappointment. So while we can get into some of the minutiae, we did a live show last night talking about the biggest moments from the playoff run for the Dodgers. We talked about the decision to go to Urias and how, in my estimation, I think that was Andrew Friedman was okay with it in some sense, but Dave Roberts was the one who made the decision. He made the decision to go to Scherzer in Game 5 of the NLDS, which is one I'm fine with. But for me, Dave Roberts, keeping him is an absolute no-brainer, as much as I don't think he's a perfect manager.
Yeah, I agree. And, another big question with this is if the Dodgers were to make a change at manager, who do they replace him with? There's no clear-cut answer. I will say I was surprised that they didn't necessarily make a change when Joe Maddon became available a few years back. I thought just because of the familiarity with Andrew Friedman that would happen. It didn't. That surprised me. And now I think if you look at the time since, you could say the Dodgers easily made the right choice because I think some of the shine has kind of come off Maddon since he won the World Series with the Cubs. And another thing, Robert, too, that you didn't get around to mentioning because there's so many accolades that he's accomplished is the Dodgers have set a franchise wins record and then tied it. So he's clearly doing something right. And I know, there is kind of frustration and a perception that he's just a puppet, an extension of the front office. I think that's a little too critical. It's definitely safe to say that Roberts and the front office work hand in hand, and I think they work well together. And I think that is something that Andrew Friedman and, frankly, you keep going up the chain, Stan Kasten, Mark Walter, and just the entire ownership group really value. And perhaps the biggest thing, like you said, the Dodgers, year in and year out, have a ton of talent on their team, a ton of depth, and that requires sacrifice. Chris Taylor could start, essentially every day at one single position for most of the teams. He doesn't with the Dodgers, but he's come to accept it, and I think some of that is kind of the picture and just situation that
Yeah, the
Dave
puppet
Roberts
of the
has
front
presented
office to me
everybody.
is not an insult. Like, I think our front office is brilliant. Like, I want Andrew Friedman making as many decisions as humanly possible when it comes to our team because he has shown time and time again that he is good at what he does and he's successful in that piece of it. So the part that I think most people downplay, and I myself have been guilty of this, what Dave Roberts brings, his number one skill is clearly not the in-game management. It is his ability to build cohesion in a clubhouse. Now, obviously, he has help with guys like Clayton Kershaw, Justin Turner. But you have to understand the personalities that the Dodgers bring in. They shoot for the moon. They're not like building this thing from scratch and saying, hey, we're all homegrown and we're the scrappy bunch. It's like Dave Roberts had to navigate the Trevor Bauer situation this year in a clubhouse where clearly that could have gone sideways. Dave Roberts navigates bringing Albert Pujols into a clubhouse where he's going to be a platoon player for the first time. He's had to navigate, as you said, a bunch of platoons. Jock Peterson, Chris Taylor, Kike Hernandez, AJ Pollock, all these things. Kenley Jansen, when he fell out of favor as the closer. AJ Pollock gets benched. Cody Bellinger gets benched. Like, Dave Roberts has had to navigate all of that, and yet the Dodgers keep winning. And so I think the thing that I would say, and Matt, we can close with this is, has Dave Roberts been perfect? No. And you ask a great question, but who is better? Like, who would you rather have than Dave Roberts as your manager? And there's not somebody out there. There's not a silver bullet person out there. Yes, he's imperfect maybe in some ways when it comes to relief decisions, but I would argue the Dodgers didn't get eliminated from the playoffs this year because Julio Urias pitched in Game 2 of the NLCS. I think that was like a massive data point, sure, but injuries were a much bigger factor. I think the offense's inability to hit with runners in scoring position was a much bigger factor. So, yes, there are pieces, but the other thing we have to that's hard because you can't quantify it is the clubhouse piece, and I think that's his greatest strength. And now that he has a World Series, now that he's been there for a while, he has built up equity that when a guy comes into the clubhouse, they know Dave Roberts is in charge. If you put a new manager in there, they open themselves up to questioning that Dave Roberts is not open to now, and I don't think we can put a value number on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So much in baseball is quantifiable and processed in batting average and on base percentage and slugging and all that. But
Yep.
there is still a human element to the sport, and I think that's like it's kind of ironic because that's what everybody sort of argues Dave Roberts isn't necessarily part of,
Yeah.
but like you just said, he clearly is. And several players have come out, not necessarily unsolicited, but just asked for their opinion of Dave Roberts. Justin Turner said earlier this year that I believe the way he phrased it was this might have been the best managerial job he's done for the team just because
Yeah.
of all the different challenges. And if I'm misremembering that, I apologize. But he basically was, singing Dave Roberts' praises, which several players have done up and down the line, from the future Hall of Famers that you've mentioned to, like you said, the role
Yeah,
players that
it's
the
a
Dodgers have
fascinating
had throughout
decision.
the
Again,
years.
if you read Andrew Friedman's quotes, it feels like this is going to get done. Friedman went on to say, hey, you know what? We've got a bunch of stuff that we have left to do. We've got guys who aren't under contract for 2022, so we're going to worry about that. Dave Roberts does have a contract in place. He will be managing. There doesn't appear to be a holdout or anything on that front. But by all indications, something is going to get worked out. Dave Roberts will receive an extension. How long remains to be seen. But he's fairly young in terms of managerial years. And so I could see this being another 3 or 4 year extension on top of the 2022 season. But again, the Dodgers are going to prioritize figuring out Corey Seager, figuring out Clayton Kershaw, figuring out Max Scherzer, Chris Taylor, all these players, a Trey Turner extension maybe. Are there trades in the works? Kenley Jansen, all sorts of pieces. He goes, you know what? We're going to figure that stuff out first, and we'll circle back to Dave Roberts. So at Dodger Blue here, we're going to have all the coverage this offseason. Once a decision is made, we will be back. We'll have breaking news on that. And then next week, we're going to do a lot of free agency talk. about all of the guys we just mentioned, their quotes about wanting to be back or not wanting to be back are open and, overanalyzing what they say and what it could possibly mean. So be sure to be here with us, Dodger Blue 1958 on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell. We'd much appreciate it. Check out DodgerBlue.com for all the latest. That's Matt Moreno. My name's Jeff Spiegel. As always, we appreciate you being with us. We'll see you soon.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.